This happened earlier this summer when my friend Alex asked me to stay at his family's beach house for the weekend. His parents own this massive place in North Carolina, right near the Outer Banks. They don't rent it out, so most of the time it just sits there empty until summer rolls around. Alex had to work, but he told me if I wanted a quiet getaway, I could have the whole house to myself for a few nights. I jumped on the chance. I was honestly burned out from work, and the thought of sitting on the porch with the ocean breeze while I cleared my head sounded perfect. I packed a bag and made the 5-hour drive down there late one Friday afternoon. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky was that weird bluish purple right before nightfall, and the street was completely silent. It felt like I had pulled into a ghost town. The house itself was massive. 3 floors with balconies that looked out over the dunes. I let myself in with the key Alex had given me, and right away I noticed that strange smell beach houses always seem to have, like salt mixed with wood that's been sitting too long. I walked through the rooms, flipping on lights as I went, and checked the place out. Everything looked normal. The kitchen was spotless, the furniture covered in sheets, and the big sliding glass doors led out to a porch overlooking the ocean. For a second, I just stood there listening to the waves. It was peaceful, almost enough to shake off the uneasiness that came from how quiet the neighborhood was. There weren't any other houses with lights on, no music, no laughter, no other beachgoers at all. I settled in, ate something quick, and spent the first night just sitting out on the balcony with my phone. At some point, I dozed off in one of the big reclining chairs out there and woke up shivering around 2 in the morning. I was heading back inside when I thought I saw something move down by the dunes. At first, I figured it was an animal, maybe a stray dog or even just the grass swaying in the wind, but I swear I saw a figure just standing there near the edge of the sand. I stood there for a solid minute, squinting into the dark, but nothing moved. I brushed it off and went to bed, but even then, I had trouble falling asleep. The second night was when things started to feel off. I had spent the day on the beach, reading, walking along the water, just enjoying being away from everything. By the time I came inside, the house felt way too big for one person. Every sound echoed. The boards creaked under my feet. I tried to tell myself it was just an old house, but there's something about being alone in a huge place that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. When I went upstairs to the bedroom I'd claimed, I noticed something strange. One of the sliding glass doors in the living room was cracked open. I could have sworn I had locked it earlier. I shut it, locked it again, and pulled the curtain across. A little while later, lying in bed, I started hearing soft thuds, like footsteps on the deck. They were slow, deliberate. I froze, listening. Then silence. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and forced myself to check. I opened the curtain just enough to peek outside. Nothing. The deck was empty, just shadows and moonlight. I told myself it had to be the house shifting or the wind. But when I turned back toward the room, I noticed something else. The closet door was slightly open. I could have sworn I had shut it when I unpacked. The tiniest sliver of darkness stared back at me from the crack. I stood there for the longest time, debating whether to open it. Finally, I grabbed a lamp, pulled the door wide, and checked. Just hangers, extra blankets, nothing else. Still, I shut it again and pushed a chair in front of it, just in case. Sometime during the night, I woke to a noise that made my stomach drop. It was the sound of the chair sliding across the floor. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, my eyes wide open in the dark. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, that maybe I had dreamed it, but then I heard it again, the unmistakable scrape of wood against wood. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The chair was no longer in front of the closet. It was halfway across the room. The closet door was wide open. I nearly dropped my phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I barely managed to keep the light steady as I swept it across the room. Nothing. No one. Just the open door and the empty room beyond it. I didn't sleep after that. I sat there until sunrise, my back against the headboard, every muscle in my body tense. The next day, I tried to convince myself I had been sleepwalking, that somehow I had gotten up, moved the chair, and forgotten. It sounded ridiculous, but the alternative was worse. I decided to spend that night downstairs instead, in the living room with the TV on. I figured the noise and light would keep my nerves in check. For a while, it worked. I was watching some random late-night movie when I heard the faint sound of footsteps again. This time they weren't on the deck. They were above me, on the second floor. I muted the TV and listened. Slow, dragging steps, moving from one end of the hall to the other. My throat went dry. I wanted to call someone, but who was I going to call? Alex? The police? What would I even say, that I heard footsteps in a house that was supposed to be empty? I sat there, clutching my phone, paralyzed. The footsteps stopped after a few minutes, but I didn't sleep at all. On my last night there, everything escalated. I had packed my things already, planning to leave at dawn. I stayed downstairs again, determined not to go back upstairs. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something that made my stomach drop. It was the sound of a door upstairs slam shut. Not just a creak, not just footsteps, but a violent slam that shook the whole ceiling. I leapt to my feet, my heart pounding, and bolted for the front door. It was locked, but when I tried to open it, the handle wouldn't budge. It was like it had been jammed from the outside. I scrambled for the back door. Same thing. Wouldn't open. That's when I heard it, the sound of someone coming down the stairs. Slow, steady steps, each one making the wood groan. I stood frozen in the living room, my eyes locked on the staircase. What I saw next still haunts me. A figure appeared at the bottom of the stairs, just barely illuminated by the light of the muted TV. It was a man, tall and gaunt, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been soaked in seawater. His face was pale, almost gray, and his hair hung in wet strands over his eyes. He didn't say anything, didn't make a sound. He just stood there, dripping, staring at me. My entire body screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. I backed up slowly until I felt the sliding glass door behind me. My hand fumbled with the lock, and by some miracle, it gave way. I threw the door open and ran barefoot into the sand, not stopping until I was halfway down the beach. I called Alex from the shoreline, shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. He didn't pick up, but I left a panicked message telling him what happened and that I wasn't going back inside. I stayed out there pacing in the sand until the first light of morning finally creeped over the horizon. Only then did I work up the nerve to grab my stuff. I went inside just long enough to grab my bag and keys. The house felt different in the daylight, almost normal, but I didn't care. I got in my car and drove off without looking back. When I finally reached Alex, he told me something that made my blood run cold. Years ago, before his parents bought it, the house had belonged to a fisherman who vanished during a storm. His body was never found, but locals swore the house was haunted. His parents thought it was just a story to scare tourists. I wanted to believe that too. But after what I saw, I know better. I haven't gone back since, and I don't plan to. Some nights when I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound of footsteps dragging slowly across the floor above me, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't made it out that door in time.
The house belonged to my cousin's friend, a guy named Alex, who swore up and down that it was the perfect summer getaway. His family owned this place for decades. tucked at the end of a quiet stretch of sand a good mile away from the more popular boardwalk. When I first laid eyes on it, I thought it was beautiful, like something off a postcard. 2 stories, pale blue siding faded by the sun, a wraparound deck that faced the water, but up close, it felt different. The windows were foggy even on a clear day. The boards groaned like they were holding back years of weight, and the air carried this faint mildew smell that clung to your clothes. Still, it was free, and when you're young and broke, free sounds better than perfect. Alex invited me, my cousin, and 2 of our other friends down for a long weekend in mid-August, and it was supposed to be nothing more than a fun little escape. The first night was normal. We got in late, dropped our bags in whatever rooms looked decent, then headed straight to the sand with a couple 6-packs. The beach was completely deserted, no one in sight for what felt like miles, just the water and us under the stars. We joked, told stories, even dared each other to swim. It felt like one of those rare nights where the world was ours. But looking back, that was the last time the trip felt normal. The strangeness started subtle, almost easy to brush off. Around 2 a.m, I noticed a single light flicker on in the upstairs window while we were still outside. At first, I thought maybe someone had left a lamp on when we brought our bags in, but when I mentioned it, Alex frowned, said the wiring upstairs barely worked and none of the lamps had bulbs. He shrugged it off like it was nothing, and I tried to laugh with him, but something about the way that faint glow blinked and then died out stuck with me. The next day passed quietly. We slept late, ate greasy sandwiches from a shack on the boardwalk, and spent the afternoon in the ocean. But when we got back to the house that evening, the atmosphere had shifted. The air inside felt heavier, thick like it hadn't been touched in months, and every room upstairs was colder than downstairs. I remember standing at the foot of the staircase and feeling like I was staring into something hollow. Still, I forced myself to ignore it, telling myself old houses always have their quirks. That night, though, I woke up to something that made my stomach turn. I was sleeping on a twin bed in a small room facing the dunes when I heard a slow dragging sound against the wood floor above me. At first, I thought one of the others was moving furniture, but when I checked the time, it was 3:17 in the morning. Too late for anyone to be up. The sound went on for a good 30 seconds, deliberate, like something heavy was being pulled from one end of the room to the other. And silence. I wanted to wake someone, but I just laid there, sweating under the covers, staring at the ceiling until I eventually dozed back off. The following morning, I mentioned it half-jokingly at breakfast, expecting Alex to laugh. Instead, he set his coffee down and admitted he'd heard it too, except he swore he heard it not above us, but in the hallway outside his room. My cousin chimed in then, saying she thought she'd heard footsteps pacing in the kitchen around the same time. We all looked at each other, trying to play it cool, but the laughter didn't come so easy anymore. Alex eventually brushed it off, insisting it was probably the old house creaking in the humidity or maybe a raccoon on the roof. We wanted to believe him, but I could see in his eyes he wasn't sure. That night was worse. Way worse. Around midnight, we all decided to crash early, too drained from the sun to stay up. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when a thud jolted me awake. It was loud enough to shake the walls. Then another. I sat up, heart pounding, straining my ears. The sound wasn't above me this time, it was inside my room. I scanned the darkness, and that's when I saw it. The closet door, which I swear had been shut, was open just a crack. Not wide, but enough for me to see the black space inside. I froze, barely breathing, waiting for something, anything to move. The silence stretched on until I convinced myself I was being paranoid. But just as I started to ease back onto the mattress, the door inched shut with a soft click. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Morning came, and I was a wreck. I didn't tell anyone what happened, partly because I knew they'd think I was losing it, but also because saying it out loud made it real. We spent the day trying to distract ourselves, but there was this unspoken tension in the group. Everyone was quieter, more watchful. At one point, my cousin pointed out something that made the hair on my arms stand up. All along the inside of the deck railing, facing the ocean, were small, wet handprints. Dozens of them. They were too small to be ours, and the wood was completely dry everywhere else. We stared at them, baffled, until Alex muttered that maybe kids had snuck onto the property from the beach. But we hadn't seen a single soul near the house since arriving, and the prints weren't scattered randomly. They lined the railing in a perfect row, like someone had placed them there one by one. That night, everything escalated. We all agreed to sleep in the living room together, not that it made much of a difference. Around 2 a.m, the air grew freezing, colder than the AC could ever make it. The windows fogged, and then the dragging sound started again, louder this time, coming from upstairs. It moved slowly from one end of the second floor to the other, then stopped directly above us. We stared at the ceiling in silence, too terrified to move. Then came the sound of something scratching, long nails scraping against wood. My cousin whispered that we should leave, but before anyone could move, the overhead light flickered on. We all looked up at the same time, and through the thin wooden planks of the ceiling, we saw shadows moving. Not one shadow, several, as if a group of people were walking back and forth in the rooms above us. But we were the only ones in that house. Panic finally won. Alex grabbed his keys and we bolted out the front door, not even stopping to grab our bags. The beach was pitch black, the waves crashing so loud it felt like they were pulling us closer. We stood in the sand trying to figure out what to do when I noticed the upstairs window again, the same one I saw light up that first night. This time the curtain was pulled back and a figure was standing there. Pale face, hollow eyes, watching us. I blinked and it was gone, but I know what I saw. The others saw it too because no one questioned me when I said we weren't going back inside. We ended up crashing in Alex's car until morning. Cramped and miserable, but safer than inside that house. When daylight came, we forced ourselves to go back in just long enough to grab our things. The upstairs was silent, undisturbed, but the strangest part was the footprints. They were everywhere now. Not just the deck railing, tiny wet handprints all along the staircase, the hallway walls, even smudged across the glass of the upstairs windows. We didn't bother cleaning, didn't even lock the door. We just left. That was over a year ago, and I haven't set foot near that stretch of beach since. Alex swears his family still owns the place, but no one stays there anymore. It just sits, abandoned. The waves eroding the sand closer and closer to its foundation. I don't know what we experienced in that house, and maybe I never will. All I know is that sometimes when I hear the ocean late at night, I think of those small, wet handprints and wonder how many more are still waiting inside.
This happened when I was 23, about 2 summers ago, and it remains the scariest trip of my life. A group of us had been invited to spend a long weekend at a beach house that belonged to my friend Carla's uncle. It was tucked away on a quiet stretch of shoreline about 2 hours outside the city, far from the tourist spots and supposedly private. The house itself looked like something you'd see on the cover of a magazine. Glass walls facing the ocean, wide decks, and an open floor plan that gave you a perfect view of the waves no matter where you were. We thought it would be the perfect place to disconnect from everything. At first, that's exactly what it was, until one night turned everything upside down. The first 2 days were perfect. We grilled outside, played music, and stayed up late talking on the deck while listening to the waves crash in the dark. There were 4 of us: me, Carla, her boyfriend Miguel, and my friend Jordan. None of us had any bad feelings about being there, even though the place was isolated. There weren't any neighbors in sight, and the nearest road was almost a mile away. At night, the only sound was the ocean, and the darkness was total once the lights were off. I've always been fine with that kind of silence, but I didn't realize how quickly it could turn against me. On the third night, something felt different. The air was heavy, and the ocean sounded louder than usual, almost like the tide was pushing itself closer to the house. We stayed outside on the deck later than usual, drinking and laughing until Jordan was the first to notice it. He asked if we saw that faint light moving just above the waves. At first, I thought it was the reflection of the moon, but when we all looked closely, we realized it was a small, flickering light moving slowly along the shoreline. It looked like someone carrying a lantern or a weak flashlight. That in itself wasn't strange, but what unsettled us was how the figure holding it seemed to stop every few steps, almost as if they were watching us. Carla called out thinking it might be a night fisherman or someone just walking the shore, but there was no answer. The figure kept moving, the light swinging slightly, and at one point it turned directly toward us. The distance made it impossible to see their face, but I swear I could feel the weight of their eyes on us. Miguel joked that maybe it was some weirdo camping out on the beach, but I could tell from the way Carla kept fidgeting that she didn't like it. After a few minutes, the light disappeared altogether, as if it had been snuffed out. We convinced ourselves it was nothing and went inside, but none of us could shake the strange feeling. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up needing water. The house was quiet, everyone asleep, but as I walked into the kitchen, I noticed movement outside through the glass wall. My stomach dropped when I saw that same faint light again, this time much closer to the house. Whoever it was stood just beyond the edge of the deck, the glow of their light barely illuminating the lower half of their body. I froze, watching them stand there in complete silence, until slowly the light tilted upward, as if they were pointing it directly at the glass. It didn't move like a normal flashlight. It felt deliberate, like they wanted me to see them but not their face. My pulse spiked and I ducked down, crawling backward until I was out of sight. I wanted to wake the others, but I didn't want to risk making a sound. I stayed crouched on the floor, every nerve in my body screaming until I finally worked up the courage to peek again. When I did, the light was gone. Whoever had been out there had either turned it off or left completely. I barely slept the rest of the night, listening for footsteps on the deck or the sound of the sliding doors moving. By morning, I convinced myself that maybe it had just been a local messing around. I didn't want to be the paranoid one who ruined the trip, so I kept quiet about what I'd seen. But I wish I had told them, because the next night proved it wasn't just my imagination. We had stayed up even later that fourth night, maybe because none of us wanted to admit how uneasy we felt. Sometime past midnight, Jordan suggested we walk down to the water and put our feet in. The beach looked eerie under the moonlight, but we all went, laughing to hide the tension. We hadn't been standing there more than a few minutes when Carla gasped and grabbed my arm. The flickering light was back, except this time it wasn't far down the shore. It was in the water, waist deep, bobbing gently as though someone was standing in the surf holding it above the waves. I'll never forget how unnatural it looked. A single orange glow swaying in the black water. Miguel shouted out again, demanding to know who it was, but the light didn't move toward us or away. It just stayed there, hovering, until slowly sinking lower and lower until the waves consumed it completely. We ran back to the house after that, locking every door and shutting the curtains. No one spoke for a while. Eventually, Miguel said it had to be some prank. Maybe someone in the area knew the house was empty most of the year and decided to scare whoever stayed there. It was the most logical explanation, but it didn't explain the silence, the way they never answered us, or how they were just standing waist deep in freezing water with a lantern. I remember lying awake that night listening to the ocean. Every crash of the tide made me think of that glowing light. The final night was the worst. We tried to act normal, cooking dinner and playing music, but there was this heavy tension none of us could shake. Around midnight, the power went out, plunging the house into total darkness, except for the pale glow of the moon through the windows. Carla screamed, thinking someone had cut the power. We scrambled for our phones and flashlights, and that's when we noticed movement outside again. A faint orange light flickered near the deck, then another one joined it. Then another. At least 3 lights swayed back and forth just beyond the glass, moving slowly, deliberately, circling the house. We huddled together in the center of the living room, whispering about whether to call the police, though none of us had service. I will never forget the sound of the sliding door handle rattling softly, as if someone was testing it. Then, after a long pause, the lights faded away one by one, swallowed by the night. We didn't move until dawn broke and the sunlight filled the room. By then, none of us doubted that something had been out there, watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. We packed up that morning in total silence, each of us avoiding the windows as if afraid we'd see those lights again. When we left the house and drove away, I felt a physical relief, like a weight being lifted from my chest. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there on that beach. Locals later told Carla that no one lives anywhere near that stretch, and there were no reports of campers or fishermen in the area. I don't know if it was people, something else, or just some twisted game meant to scare us away. All I know is that I've never gone back to that house, and I never will. Even now, sometimes when I hear the ocean at night, I swear I can see those flickering lights waiting just beyond the waves.